Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to explore this fascinating idea from Shankar Vedantam's book, Useful Delusions. You sent me this excerpt, and it's this idea that believing things that might not be strictly true, like quote-unquote true, can actually be good for us. And it all connects back to a story you probably remember. The Covington High School incident.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember that viral video with the Native American elder and the high school boys in the Magie hats.
It definitely captured the nation's attention, sparked a ton of controversy about race, politics, and the whole idea of how we judge based on limited information, especially, I think, online.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like everyone had a really strong opinion on it, and it really felt like, at the time, a microcosm of what was going on in America. For those who may not remember the specifics, it involved a video clip of a confrontation between a group of high school boys, some wearing Magie hats, and a Native American elder, Nathan Phillips, drumming and chanting.
Right.
The initial video that went viral was very short and seemed to show the boys mocking and disrespecting Phillips.
And that's where the whole danger of snap judgments comes in, right? Social media, loves to amplify the most sensational, the most emotionally charged version of events, and a lot of times without the full context.
Right. It's like you're getting the last page of a mystery novel, and you think you know what happened.
Exactly.
But you haven't read the whole story.
Yeah, you missed all the good stuff.
Exactly. The book highlights this perfectly through the experience of this woman, Julie Irwin Zimmerman. She's a mom, and she had a really visceral, negative reaction to that initial video. She felt horrified by what she saw. She interpreted it as blatant racism and bullying, and like so many others, she felt certain about what had happened.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how our brains work, right?
Yeah.
We tend to see what we expect to see, especially when it comes to something like race and politics, which is so emotionally charged. So our pre-existing beliefs, our biases, they all kind of come together to shape how we perceive things. And it leads us to these kind of premature conclusions.
Right. And Zimmerman herself admits that she fell into that trap. It was only later, as longer videos emerged, that started to paint a more complex picture of what happened.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? So these longer videos, they showed that the students were actually initially confronted by another group, this group called the Black Hebrew Israelites. They were yelling insults at the students.
Oh, wow.
And Phillips, he wasn't alone either.
Okay.
He was with a group of activists. And those build the wall chants that everyone thought they heard, turns out those never actually happened.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing how much the narrative shifted once more information came out.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Zimmerman realized, that she, like many others, had jumped to conclusions without having all the facts.
To her credit, she acknowledged that publicly. She wrote an article where she, was like, hey, I was wrong. But what's fascinating and maybe a little unsettling is how that admission got kind of swept up into people's agendas, you know? And this just goes to show how easily attempts at correcting misinformation can get caught up in, political stuff.
It really highlights the power of group identity. We often feel this pressure to conform to the beliefs of our quote-unquote tribe, even when evidence challenges those beliefs.
Right.
And admitting we're wrong, it almost feels like you're betraying your group.
For sure.
And Zimmerman experienced this firsthand. Her article actually made her a hero to conservatives, which is a group she doesn't identify with.
Right.
And that made her feel uncomfortable. It's almost like, wait, I'm betraying my own in-group by admitting they might have been wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great example of how even when we're trying to be objective, our need to belong, our group affiliation, it really affects how we process information and how we react to things. This whole tribalistic instinct can really prevent us from seeing the nuances of what's going on, and it stops us from having real conversations with people who think differently.
Yeah, it's like you said, we see this rush to judgment in the Covington incident. And the book then connects that to this really interesting study by a psychologist, Jennifer Whitson.
Okay.
She studied conspiracy theories. And she found that people who feel a lack of control in their lives are more likely to see patterns where there are none.
Right.
Which leads them to these conspiracy theories.
It's fascinating. It connects to that need for certainty and order in a world that can feel really chaotic.
Right.
When we feel powerless, we're more prone to, misinformation or those really simplistic explanations.
Yeah.
And conspiracy theories, they offer a way to regain some of that sense of control by giving a narrative, even if it's not true, It's this illusion of understanding and predictability, even if it's built on faulty logic.
It makes you wonder if this needs to be in control to have a clear narrative if it actually blinds us to the complexity of the situation.
Oh, absolutely. And, in the Covington case, we saw people on both sides of the political spectrum clinging to narratives that fit their existing beliefs.
Yeah.
Even when the evidence contradicted those narratives, it was like they were so invested in their own story that they just couldn't see anything else.
Right, right. And that brings us to, I think, the most thought-provoking part of what Vedantam explores in the book. He says that sometimes we actually need to work with the self-deceptive parts of our brains, not just against them.
Interesting.
And he suggests that some beliefs, even if they're not literally true, can actually be a force for good.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Welcome back to the deep dive. We were just talking about that Covington High School incident, right? And how it, really shows our tendency to jump to conclusions when we only have part of the story.
Right.
Now we're going to get into the psychology of all of this, like how our brains, even when we think we're being all rational and logical, can actually lead us astray.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
All right. So Vedantam, in his book, he talks about this thing called motivated reasoning, which basically means, we unconsciously search for information that backs up what we already believe.
Okay.
Even if it means ignoring stuff that says the opposite. It's like we're lawyers for our own opinions.
Yeah.
Building up a case instead of being like impartial judges, just trying to be fair.
Oh, that's such a good analogy because it's true. When you really want to believe something, you become like a master at finding the evidence that supports it. You ignore all the other stuff.
Totally. We cherry pick data, we twist things to fit our viewpoint, and we forget or downplay, anything that contradicts our precious little beliefs.
Right. It's almost like our brains are trying to protect us from the discomfort of being wrong. I know I've definitely felt that. Admitting you were wrong, it can be tough.
Yeah.
It can shake your sense of self, your identity, even your sense of belonging with, your groups.
You're hitting on something really important there. That's where this idea of cognitive dissonance comes in. It's that, uncomfortable feeling we get when we hold two beliefs that clash or our actions don't match up with our values.
Right.
And that tension, it makes us scramble to fix it. And often the easiest fix is to just reject the information that's messing with our beliefs.
So instead of changing our minds, we dig in even deeper.
Exactly. We might attack the person who told us the information or just come up with all these fancy rationalizations to explain it away.
Right. It's like we're hardwired to want everything to be consistent.
Yeah.
And we just avoid that mental discomfort of contradictions.
And it's a totally human thing. We all do it. It's kind of what makes us human, these little mental shortcuts.
But knowing this, like being aware that our brains can pull these tricks on us, it feels like that could be a superpower. Like understanding how our brains can trick us could actually help us be more careful, more open to hearing other people's points of view.
It absolutely can. The key is to be aware of these mental traps.
Yeah.
So once we understand how our brains work and how they can deceive us into believing things that aren't really true or holding on to beliefs that aren't helpful anymore, we can start being more thoughtful. We can question our assumptions, try to look at things from different angles, and engage in good conversations even when it's hard, which is especially important these days because there's so much information coming at us.
Yeah, it's true.
And so much of it is designed to just play on our emotions and reinforce what we already believe.
It's like everyone is fighting for our attention, trying to pull us to their side.
Yeah, and with social media and these algorithms, it's all designed to, keep us scrolling.
Right.
They feed us stuff we already agree with, and we end up in these echo chambers where we never even see another point of view.
It's true. And then those echo chambers make our beliefs even stronger, and it's even harder to change our minds.
Right. And then when we do finally encounter something that challenges what we believe, it usually leads to a fight. It's like we've forgotten how to, disagree respectfully, how to actually talk about tough stuff without, attacking each other.
Yeah. And it sometimes feels like people are more interested in winning an argument than actually trying to understand each other's perspective.
Totally. It can be disheartening, but I do think there's hope. By understanding the psychology, being more aware of our own biases and how our brains can kind of mislead us.
Okay.
We can actually start to build bridges between these different viewpoints.
Like that, building bridges. So how do we actually do that? How do we have more productive conversations when we don't agree with someone? I feel like sometimes the gap is just so big.
It starts with remembering that the people we disagree with, they're not, the enemy. Yeah.
It's not like they're evil or stupid. They just have their own experiences, their own beliefs.
Right.
And just like us, they might be doing all that motivated reasoning, that dissonance stuff, to make sense of the world.
So basically, stop assuming the worst about people who see things differently.
Exactly. It's all about empathy and understanding. So instead of trying to win the argument, what if we actually listen? Really try to see where the other person is coming from.
Mm-hmm. It's like going into the conversation curious instead of like, you're going to battle.
That's a great way to put it. Replace judgment with curiosity. Instead of thinking we already know everything, we should go in wanting to learn, even if we disagree.
Yeah.
Because learning new things is what helps us grow. It challenges our assumptions, broadens our horizon.
And that brings us back to this whole idea of useful delusions.
And how maybe we can use the power of belief to actually tackle real-world problems. We'll explore that more in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about this concept of useful delusions and how believing things that might not be, strictly true could sometimes actually be beneficial. It's pretty trippy when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is.
But, we've been talking about how we all do this to a certain degree, right?
Do. I mean, think about all the stories we tell ourselves about our lives, our identities, the things that get us going.
Yeah.
Are those stories always like perfectly accurate, or do we kind of, maybe add some details, leave some stuff out, maybe even invent whole chapters to make the narrative, sound better, more inspiring?
Yeah, it's like we're the authors of our own life stories and, we want them to be good, meaningful.
Exactly. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Right.
These stories, even if they're a little, embellished, they can give us a sense of purpose.
Right.
Help us through tough times and even push us to be better.
So when does a belief become a useful delusion?
Right.
And when does it go too far and become something, harmful? How do we know if it's helping us or holding us back?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think a big part of it is whether the belief makes things better, for ourselves and others. Yeah. Does it help us do good?
Okay.
Or does it cause more problems? That's a good place to start thinking about it.
So a useful delusion might be something that motivates us to be more kind, to help others.
Yeah.
Be more involved in our community.
Exactly. Or it could be something that helps us overcome fear, face challenges, pursue our dreams even when it's tough.
Like believing that we can make a difference even if we feel small and insignificant.
Yes. That belief can be so powerful. And on the other hand, you have beliefs that can lead to bad stuff, like prejudice or even violence.
Right.
Or beliefs that stop us from asking for help when we need it.
Yeah.
Those are the beliefs we need to really examine.
It's interesting. Vedantam talks about religious belief. Some people might consider that a delusion, but he points out that it can be a really strong force for good.
It definitely can. Think of all the acts of kindness, people helping others, protecting the environment, all inspired by faith. But like any powerful force, it can also be misused.
Right.
If it's taken too far or twisted, it can lead to intolerance, conflict, even violence.
So it seems like it all comes down to balance.
Yeah.
We have to be aware of the downsides of our beliefs, even the ones we hold dear, but also recognize that belief can be a powerful motivator for good.
It's like walking a tightrope, being skeptical but also having faith, thinking critically but being open to something bigger than ourselves.
It sounds like navigating these useful delusions requires a lot of self-awareness, critical thinking, and maybe even a little humility.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's all about realizing that none of us have all the answers and that we're all susceptible to these biases, these useful delusions,
But by understanding how our brains work, we can become better thinkers, more compassionate and engaged, not just passively absorbing everything we see and hear.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Shankar Vedantam's Useful Delusions. It's been quite a journey. We've talked about snap judgments, the Covington High School incident, all the psychology of belief and bias, how our brains can kind of trick us, the power of stories, the influence of emotions.
It's been a lot to take in, but it's definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm going to start paying more attention to those stories I tell myself, the beliefs that guide my actions.
Yeah.
Ask myself, are these beliefs helping me and the people around me? Or are they holding me back?
That's such a great question for all of us to ask ourselves. What stories are we clinging to? What useful delusions are shaping our world?
Yeah, it's like an invitation to be more curious and humble as we go through life. Always be willing to question what we think we know.
It's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding, connecting, and creating a world where we can all thrive.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into useful delusions.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep believing in the power